Welcome back, coin collectors and treasure hunters. Today, we are taking a fascinating journey through the world of United Kingdom halfpennies, focusing on 5 dates and varieties that deserve special attention from collectors. These tiny bronze coins may look ordinary at first glance, but certain years, varieties, exceptional conditions, and unusual production characteristics can make them considerably more desirable. Before we begin, remember that a coin's value is never determined by the date alone. Condition, originality, eye appeal, rarity, variety, and the strength of the collector market all play an important role. Published collecting guides currently identify the 1923 George V halfpenny as one of the scarcer George V dates and the 1925 modified effigy variety as an important variety to watch. Let's get started. First up, the United Kingdom 1940 halfpenny featuring King George VI. If you have found one of these old halfpennies in a box of coins, an inherited collection, or even among old family possessions, you may be wondering whether its age, design, and condition could make it interesting to collectors. In this video, we are focusing especially on a 1940 halfpenny in dirty or heavily circulated condition, and we will explore its history, unique features, collector demand, and realistic market values in US dollars. The important thing to remember is that age alone does not automatically make a coin extremely valuable, but certain varieties, attractive original surfaces, and unusually high grades can make a major difference. The 1940 halfpenny belongs to the reign of King George VI, who became king in 1936 and ruled during one of the most important periods in modern British history. The year 1940 was especially significant because Britain was in the middle of the Second World War. The halfpenny was still an important denomination in everyday British commerce, and millions were produced for circulation. Records list a mintage of approximately 32,162,400 examples for the 1940 issue, making it a collectible historical coin but not an ultra-low mintage rarity in its normal circulated form. That wartime background gives this little bronze coin an additional historical attraction because it was produced during a dramatic period when Britain was facing enormous economic and military challenges. One of the most interesting aspects of the 1940 halfpenny is its classic George VI design. The obverse carries the portrait of King George VI, while the reverse features the traditional seated Britannia design associated with British halfpennies. The coin was struck in bronze and has the familiar small, substantial appearance that many collectors immediately recognize as a classic pre-decimal British coin. Collectors also pay attention to lettering, portrait details, the date, the positioning of design elements, and the overall quality of the strike. Importantly, references identify reverse varieties for the 1940 issue, so a collector should not simply look at the date and assume every 1940 halfpenny is identical. Now let us talk about the condition of the coin shown in our discussion today. Dirty condition. Dirt, dark toning, surface marks, and heavy circulation are common on coins that have spent decades outside controlled storage. A dirty appearance does not automatically mean the coin has no collector interest. In fact, collectors can still appreciate a worn 1940 halfpenny because it represents a genuine survivor from the wartime era. However, condition is extremely important when determining price. Current catalogue style values for the 1940 halfpenny rise significantly as the grade improves, with numismatics indicative figures showing roughly 13 cents in lower grades, around 57 cents in extremely fine, about 90 cents in almost uncirculated, and up to around $11 in uncirculated condition. These figures are indicative rather than guaranteed auction prices. For a genuinely dirty and heavily circulated example, the realistic market value is generally much more modest than the price of a top-grade specimen. A collector might encounter ordinary examples for around 10 cents to $1, depending on how much detail remains, the surfaces, eye appeal, and whether the coin has any interesting variety. A cleaner fine or very fine example can move toward the $1 to $3 range, while stronger extremely fine examples can be worth several dollars more. Another UK coin guide lists the 1940 halfpenny at approximately £2 in extremely fine and £10 in uncirculated, illustrating how strongly condition can influence the value of this date. The key point is that a dirty coin should not be compared with a brilliant uncirculated example simply because both carry the same 1940 date. There is also an important lesson here about rarity and collector demand. The 1940 halfpenny is not rare simply because it is more than 80 years old. With more than 32 million struck, ordinary circulated pieces are relatively available to collectors. However, collectors building complete George VI halfpenny date sets still need a 1940 example, and specialists may become particularly interested when they encounter a desirable reverse variety, strong strike, attractive natural toning, or unusually well-preserved surfaces. This is where the difference between an old coin and a collectible coin becomes important. A coin can be common in general circulation but still have a strong place in a specialized collection, When looking at auction market potential, it is important to stay realistic. A dirty 1940 halfpenny should not automatically be described as a coin worth thousands or millions of dollars. The available market data does not support such a claim for an ordinary circulated example. Instead, the real excitement comes from identifying the coin correctly and discovering whether it has something unusual. Numismatics' current indicative data places the normal 1940 issue at values from only a few cents in lower grades to around $11 in uncirculated condition, while exceptional proof or special pieces can be dramatically different. This makes authentication, variety identification, and professional grading especially important when a coin appears unusual. If you have a 1940 halfpenny, my first advice is do not clean it aggressively. Cleaning can create scratches, unnatural brightness, or other surface problems that may reduce collector appeal. Instead, examine the coin under good lighting and use a magnifying glass to study the date, portrait, reverse design, lettering, and edge. Look for unusual. Next up, the United Kingdom 1949 halfpenny featuring King George VI. At first glance, this small bronze coin may look ordinary, especially when it has been circulated and shows the natural signs of age, but coins like this can be surprisingly interesting to collectors because they preserve a direct connection to Britain's post-war history. The 1949 halfpenny had a recorded mintage of 24,744,000 pieces, so it is not considered an extremely rare date in absolute numbers. However, its historical importance, attractive classic design, surviving condition, and collector interest make it a worthwhile coin to examine carefully. Current catalogue indications place a 1949 halfpenny in fine condition at around 46 cents, with higher grades reaching roughly $1 or more, while actual marketplace and auction results can vary depending on eye appeal, originality, provenance, and demand. The story of this coin takes us back to Britain under King George VI, only a few years after the end of the Second World War. Britain was rebuilding, and everyday coins were an important part of ordinary life. The halfpenny was a small denomination used for everyday purchases, making this coin a genuine survivor from the economic life of post-war Britain. The 1949 issue was struck in bronze at the Royal Mint in London, and its design belonged to the George VI halfpenny series that began in the late 1930s. The coin therefore represents not only a monetary denomination but also an important period in British history, when the country was moving from wartime conditions toward reconstruction and a changing post-war economy. With more than 24 million examples produced, the 1949 date was widely distributed, but finding examples with attractive original surfaces and clearly preserved details becomes more interesting for collectors. One of the most distinctive features of the 1949 halfpenny is its reverse design. Instead of a simple coat of arms or portrait-style emblem, the reverse displays a three-masted sailing ship with the words halfpenny and the date 1949. The ship design is based on Sir Francis Drake's Golden Hind, connecting this humble denomination with one of the most famous maritime stories in English history. The design originally appeared as part of the 1937 Edward VIII halfpenny pattern and continued into the George VI series. On the obverse is the portrait of King George VI, while the coin's edge is plain. The standard halfpenny was a substantial bronze piece for its denomination, with the standard weight given as 80 coins to the avoirdupois pound. These details give the 1949 halfpenny considerable visual and historical character. Now let us talk about rarity and collector demand, especially when the coin is in fine condition. A fine example is expected to show noticeable circulation, with some wear across the highest points of the design, but the major lettering, date, portrait, and reverse ship should remain identifiable. Because the 1949 issue had a large mintage, collectors should not assume that every example is rare or extremely valuable. Its real attraction comes from combining the date, historical period, design, condition, and overall appearance. A naturally aged bronze surface, readable details, and freedom from harsh cleaning can make an ordinary circulated example much more appealing than a heavily damaged or artificially cleaned coin. In other words, the collector value of this coin is not simply about how old it is about how well that individual example has survived. When we reach the current market value in dollars, it is important to separate realistic collector prices from exaggerated claims sometimes seen online. Numismatics' current indicative figures list the 1949 halfpenny at approximately 46 cents in fine condition, about 66 cents in very fine, around $1.10 in extremely fine, and roughly $1.20 in uncirculated condition. These are indicative values rather than guaranteed auction prices. Another British coin guide gives approximately £1 for an extremely fine example and £4 for an uncirculated specimen, illustrating how grade can make a meaningful difference. A recently recorded online sale for a 1949 British halfpenny was around $1.38, although the exact grade and circumstances of that individual transaction matter. For a 1949 halfpenny specifically described as fine condition, a sensible modern expectation is therefore in the modest dollar range rather than the hundreds or thousands. Around 40 cents to $1 can be a reasonable general reference for an ordinary circulated example, with stronger pieces potentially bringing more when sold to the right collector. Exceptional high-grade examples, varieties, unusual errors, or pieces with special provenance can behave differently from ordinary circulated coins. This is why collectors should never judge a coin's value from the date alone. Auction prices depend on the exact coin, its grade, originality, eye appeal, rarity of any variety, and the level of competition among bidders. For collectors who discover a 1949 halfpenny, the first tip is simple: protect the coin before trying to improve it. Avoid aggressive polishing, scraping, abrasive materials, or household chemicals. Bronze coins can lose their natural surfaces when cleaned, and an original aged appearance is often preferable to a bright but damaged surface. Examine both sides under good lighting, check that the date is clearly 1949, inspect the portrait and ship for details, and look closely for unusual die characteristics or minting errors. If you believe your example is significantly better than a normal circulated coin, professional grading or specialist advice may be worthwhile, particularly before entering an auction. Another important tip is to compare your coin with reliable references rather than relying on dramatic claims about enormous values. The 1949 halfpenny is historically interesting and collectible, but its large mintage means that an ordinary fine example should not automatically be advertised as a fortune. The strongest approach is to highlight what is genuinely special: the George VI history, the Golden Hind-inspired ship design, the post-war British story, the bronze composition, and the opportunity to own a piece of everyday British life from 1949. For serious collectors, building a complete George VI halfpenny date collection can make individual dates like 1949 much more meaningful. So, in conclusion, the 1949 United Kingdom halfpenny is a wonderful example of how an inexpensive old coin can still tell a powerful. Next up, the United Kingdom 1948 halfpenny featuring King George VI. If you have found one of these old bronze halfpennies in a collection, an inherited coin box, or even among mixed world coins, you may be wondering whether it is simply an old piece of pocket change or something that collectors would actually want. The 1948 halfpenny is an interesting date because it belongs to the final years of the George VI halfpenny series, and although circulated examples are generally not considered extremely rare, they can still have genuine collector interest. The key is understanding the date, design, condition, originality, and the difference between ordinary circulated examples and exceptional specimens. Published references record a 1948 mintage of roughly 26.95 million pieces, so this is not a coin that should automatically be described as a great rarity. However, its historical age, attractive classic design, and place in the George VI series make it a worthwhile coin for British collectors. The history behind this coin makes it even more interesting. The 1948 halfpenny was struck during the reign of King George VI, only a few years after the Second World War. Britain was going through a period of major economic and social change, and traditional bronze coins remained an important part of everyday commerce. This halfpenny was designed as a circulation coin rather than as a special commemorative issue, meaning millions were produced for ordinary use. The coin was struck at the London Mint and was made from bronze. Reference specifications place its diameter at approximately 25.5 mm and its weight at around 5.67 grams, with a plain edge. These details help identify an authentic example and distinguish the British 1948 halfpenny from similarly dated halfpennies issued by other countries of the British Commonwealth. One of the most attractive features of the 1948 halfpenny is its classic George VI portrait on the obverse. The king faces left, surrounded by the traditional royal inscription associated with his reign. On the reverse is the famous image of Sir Francis Drake's ship, the Golden Hind, together with the denomination halfpenny and the date 1948. This design gives the coin considerable historical character because the Golden Hind connects the coin to one of the best-known figures and voyages in British maritime history. For collectors, the combination of a royal portrait, a famous ship, and a pre-decimal denomination makes this more than just an old piece of bronze. It represents a particular period in Britain's history when coins carried designs that were both functional and strongly connected to national identity. Now let's talk about rarity, because this is where collectors need to be realistic and careful. A 1948 halfpenny in circulated condition is not normally considered an ultra-rare coin. With a mintage of about 26.95 million, there were substantial numbers produced, and surviving examples can still be found today. Some catalogue references even describe the date as relatively common for its period. That does not mean the coin has no value or collector demand. Instead, it means that condition becomes extremely important. A worn, heavily circulated example may have only modest market value, while a sharply struck coin with strong detail, attractive natural color, and minimal wear can be considerably more desirable. For the circulated coin shown in today's discussion, collectors should pay particular attention to the remaining detail on King George VI portrait, the lettering around the obverse, the golden hind on the reverse, and the visibility of the date. Natural brown or bronze toning can also be attractive when it is even and original. Small marks and normal circulation wear are expected on a coin of this age, but severe corrosion, cleaning, deep scratches, bends, or other damage can reduce its desirability. The important point is that an old coin does not automatically become rare simply because it has survived for many decades. Collectors usually separate age from rarity and then evaluate the coin according to condition, scarcity, variety, provenance, and actual market demand. When we turn to market value, the 1948 halfpenny shows a wide difference between ordinary circulated pieces and exceptional examples. Current catalog-style references give values ranging from only a few cents in heavily worn grades to several dollars for higher-grade examples, while another guide lists approximately £1 for extremely fine and £4 for uncirculated examples. Converted roughly into US dollars, that puts ordinary circulated examples generally in the low dollar or even sub-dollar range, depending on grade and exchange rates. One market database reports an average auction price around $25 for regular examples, but that figure is influenced by the small number of documented auction records and especially by higher-grade certified pieces, so it should not be interpreted as the guaranteed value of every circulated 1948 halfpenny. There is an important lesson here for anyone making videos or researching coin values. Auction records and guide prices are not the same thing as a guaranteed selling price. An exceptional coin can bring a surprising result because of certification, quality, eye appeal, provenance, or a particularly strong collector audience. For example, documented auction data for the 1948 British halfpenny includes a certified proof example that sold for hundreds of dollars, demonstrating how dramatically special pieces can differ from ordinary circulated coins. That result should not be used to claim that a normal worn 1948 halfpenny is worth hundreds of dollars. Instead, it shows why collectors should identify the exact variety and grade before estimating value. For a normal circulated 1948 example, a sensible expectation is usually modest rather than spectacular. Depending on the exact grade and market, a worn coin may be worth well under $1, while a better circulated example can move into the $1 range or somewhat higher. Higher grade pieces can reach several dollars, and certified exceptional specimens can command much more. The strongest prices belong to coins with unusual characteristics or outstanding preservation, not simply to every coin carrying the date 1948. Next up, the United Kingdom 1942 halfpenny featuring King George VI, particularly an example showing a dark or black shade and circulated condition. At first glance, a dark-looking halfpenny might appear ordinary or heavily worn, but coins from the wartime era can still attract collectors because of their historical background, recognizable design, and surviving condition. The important point is that a black shade by itself does not automatically make the coin rare or extremely valuable. Instead, collectors consider the date, authenticity, details, condition, surface quality, and whether the darker appearance is natural toning or the result of environmental exposure. Current catalog and market references place ordinary 1942 examples in relatively modest price ranges, while much better preserved specimens can command higher prices. The 1942 halfpenny was produced during the Second World War, when Britain was facing enormous economic and industrial pressure. King George VI was on the throne, and British coinage from this period is especially interesting because every denomination formed part of the everyday monetary system used by millions of people. The halfpenny was a small denomination, but it played an important role in ordinary transactions. The 1942 issue was struck in bronze and had a recorded mintage of approximately 71.9 million pieces according to Numista and other reference sources. That relatively large mintage means the date itself is not considered one of the great rarities of British halfpenny collecting. One of the most attractive features of this coin is its classic George VI design. On the obverse is the bare-headed portrait of King George VI facing left, accompanied by the royal legend. The reverse carries the famous image of the Golden Hind, the ship associated with Sir Francis Drake, with the denomination halfpenny and the date 1942. The coin is approximately 25.5 mm in diameter, weighs around 5.67 grams, and has a plain edge. These details make identification relatively straightforward, especially when the date and major design elements remain visible. Now let's talk about the black shade condition, because this is where many collectors become curious. A dark brown, blackish, or heavily toned appearance can develop as a bronze coin reacts with its surrounding environment over many decades. Sometimes collectors appreciate natural, attractive patina because it demonstrates age and originality. However, If the dark surface is caused by corrosion, staining, chemical treatment, or harsh cleaning, it may reduce the coin's appeal. This is why a black-looking 1942 halfpenny should not automatically be advertised as a rare error or a valuable variety. The real collector interest comes from the combination of the wartime date, recognizable design, originality, and whatever detail remains on the coin in damaged or heavily circulated condition. Collector demand is usually more modest than for a sharply detailed example. Nevertheless, an old British coin does not have to be perfect to be collectible. Some collectors specifically enjoy assembling complete date runs of George VI halfpennies, while others collect coins from the Second World War as historical objects. A 1942 example can therefore have a place in a collection even when the surfaces are dark, worn, or imperfect. The key is accurate grading and honest description. A damaged coin should be presented as damaged or heavily circulated rather than being described as an exceptionally rare specimen. So, what could a 1942 United Kingdom halfpenny actually be worth in today's market? Reference values show a wide range depending on grade. Numista's indicative figures for the 1942 issue are around 15 cents in very low grades, rising through approximately 57 cents in higher circulated grades and reaching roughly $2.10 to $2.30 in the highest listed condition categories. Another British coin reference gives guide prices of about £1 for extremely fine and £5 for uncirculated, while another market reference lists approximately 5 pence in very good, 15 pence in fine, 40 pence in very fine, £1 in extremely fine, £4 in about uncirculated, and £6 or more in uncirculated condition. These figures are guides rather than guaranteed auction prices, and actual selling prices can vary. For a black shade example in heavily circulated or damaged condition, a realistic expectation is generally toward the lower end of the market rather than the premium levels achieved by attractive uncirculated coins. In dollar terms, an ordinary worn example may be worth only a small amount, potentially around a few cents to under $1 depending on its exact condition and buyer demand. A better preserved example with strong details can move into the approximately $1 to $3 range, while exceptionally attractive high-grade pieces may bring more. These ranges should be treated as general market guidance, not a promise that every coin will sell for a particular amount. Auction fees, provenance, certification, photographs, buyer interest, and the precise grade can all influence the final result. For collectors who discover a dark 1942 halfpenny, the first tip is simple: do not clean it aggressively. Scrubbing, polishing, chemical dipping, or abrasive treatment can permanently damage the original surface and may make the coin less desirable to experienced collectors. Instead, examine the coin under good lighting and check the date, portrait, reverse design, edge, and overall surfaces. Look for unusual doubling, striking characteristics, die differences, or other features that might deserve further research. If the coin appears particularly sharp or unusual, photographs from both sides can be useful when asking a reputable coin dealer or numismatist for an opinion. Another important tip is to compare your coin with actual market information rather than sensational online claims. A 1942 halfpenny is historically interesting, but its large mintage means the date alone does not make it a $1 million rarity. The value of a genuine collectible coin is normally determined by the combination of scarcity, grade, eye appeal, demand, and verified market results. If you see an online advertisement claiming an ordinary dark 1942 halfpenny is worth tens of thousands or millions of dollars, approach that claim with extreme caution and look for documented sales of comparable coins. Finally, remember that coin collecting is not only about price. Holding a 1942 halfpenny means holding a. Next up, the United Kingdom 1957 halfpenny featuring the young Queen Elizabeth II. If you have a 1957 halfpenny sitting in an old collection, box, drawer, or inherited coin jar, you may be wondering whether its age, unusual dark or dirty shade, and historical character could make it valuable. The 1957 halfpenny is an interesting collectible because it belongs to the early Elizabeth II period, when Britain was still using the traditional pre-decimal currency system. While an ordinary circulated example is generally a modest value coin, collectors can become much more interested when a piece has a desirable variety, attractive natural toning, strong details, or an unusually well-preserved surface. Current reference information records a substantial 1957 mintage of around 43.7 million pieces, so this is not a rare date simply because it was made in 1957. Its real collecting interest comes from the individual coin, its variety, condition, and eye appeal. The story of this coin begins in 1957, during the reign of Queen Elizabeth II. Britain was still decades away from decimalisation, so the halfpenny remained part of everyday British currency. The coin was struck in bronze and featured the young Queen Elizabeth II on the obverse, with her laureate portrait facing right. The reverse carried one of the most recognizable designs of the British halfpenny series, Sir Francis Drake's ship, the Golden Hind, sailing on the sea, with the denomination halfpenny above and the date 1957 below. The coin has a plain edge, weighs approximately 5.67 grams, and measures about 25.5 millimeters across. These details make it a classic example of Britain's pre-decimal bronze coinage and an attractive historical link to everyday life in the 1950s. One of the most interesting features of the 1957 halfpenny is that collectors recognize different reverse varieties, commonly described as the calm seas and rough seas types. This distinction can make an important difference when comparing otherwise similar coins. The calm seas variety is generally regarded as the harder to find type, while the rough seas variety is considered easier to obtain. For collectors, this means that simply seeing the date 1957 is not always enough. The reverse should be examined carefully, especially the appearance of the waves around the Golden Hind. A collector who can identify the variety correctly may discover that a coin has greater interest than an ordinary example of the same date. Now let's talk about the dirty or dark shade condition mentioned for this coin. A dark appearance does not automatically mean that a coin is rare or extremely valuable. Bronze naturally develops color over time, and old coins can acquire brown, chocolate, or darker surfaces through storage and environmental exposure. In some cases, collectors actually appreciate attractive natural toning because it gives the coin an authentic aged appearance. However, there is an important difference between natural toning and harmful dirt, corrosion, staining, or surface damage. A coin with attractive original color and clear details can be much more appealing than a heavily damaged piece. Therefore, the 1957 halfpenny should be judged by its overall condition rather than by its dark color alone. Reference guides specifically note that desirable natural toning can influence the appeal and value of bronze halfpennies. The rarity question is especially important. With a reported mintage of approximately 43,684,800, the standard 1957 halfpenny is not considered an ultra-low mintage British coin. That means collectors should be careful about claims suggesting that every 1957 halfpenny is worth thousands or millions of dollars. The ordinary circulated examples generally trade at relatively modest prices. One current guide gives the standard 1957 halfpenny an uncirculated guide value of around £1, while another reference gives rough seas examples values from only a few pence in very worn grades to a few pounds in uncirculated condition. The calm seas variety receives considerably higher guide values in better grades, reaching around £30 or more in uncirculated condition according to that source. So, what could a dirty shade 1957 halfpenny actually be worth in today's market? For an ordinary circulated example with significant wear, dark color, and no special variety or error, a realistic value is generally only a small amount, often around $1 or $2 depending on the buyer, quality, and market. Recent online sales provide useful evidence. One 1957 UK halfpenny sold for about $2.54, while another UK sale was recorded at £1.55. These are much more realistic indicators for ordinary examples than sensational claims of enormous prices. However, the story becomes more interesting when we move toward better preserved coins and desirable varieties. A 1957 halfpenny with strong original detail, attractive natural color, minimal wear, and the scarcer calm seas variety can command considerably more than a heavily worn example. One published guide places a calm seas 1957 halfpenny around £1 in fine condition, approximately £3 in very fine, £8 in extremely fine, £20 in about uncirculated, and £30 or more in uncirculated condition. These figures should be treated as guide estimates rather than guaranteed auction prices, because the actual selling price can change according to eye appeal, provenance, grading, buyer demand, and the exact variety. This is where auction collecting becomes especially exciting. Auction buyers are not simply paying for the date, they are evaluating the complete coin. A well-struck example with original surfaces and a desirable variety can attract stronger competition than a common, heavily circulated piece. There are also proof examples that demonstrate how dramatically condition and rarity can change prices. For example, London Coins records a 1957 halfpenny proof graded NFDC with almost full luster that realized £240 in a past auction. That result should not be confused with the value of an ordinary dirty circulated coin, but it clearly demonstrates why collectors need to distinguish standard circulation pieces from unusual proof or exceptional examples. If you own one of these coins, the first tip is simple: do not clean it aggressively. Scrubbing, polishing, chemicals, or abrasive materials can permanently damage the original surface and may reduce collector appeal. Instead, examine the coin carefully under good lighting.